Hey, Miguel Iturrate and Anthony Scott Piatt here together again on the Cage Rage podcast. And it's the end of 2019, New Year's Eve, a couple of days away, Christmas just a couple of days behind. And we're getting here together to talk about what boxing looks like at the end of 2019. We're going to analyze some of the top 10 lists that are out there. And we're going to point out some fighters to watch here in 2020. ASP, you loaded for this one?
I'm excited about it.
I mean with info.
Yeah, loaded with info. No, look, hey, look, this is going to be a great year of boxing. I think that the heavyweight division is something that we'll touch on at the end of this show. Where these lists are at. I've got 5 different lists. We can talk about kind of where people are at least in the top 3, and then some notes. So this show should be good for the whole next year. You can come back and watch this, folks, whenever you want throughout 2020. Because we'll be talking about some of the matchups that we expect to see and who we expect to see on this list next year that's not on it now, and who might move up, who might move down. It's going to be a fun one. A lot of info to share. Let's get to it.
Well, you talked about the heavyweights. We might as well start there, I guess we could talk about Andy Ruiz Jr. and Joshua too. And that, played out, I guess, according to the script at the end of the day. Joshua's got the belts again. He's now got the one blemish on his record. I think there's still a lot of questions there. I think Ruiz, more power to him. I hope he banked some money and he didn't blow it all away and stuff like that. But I don't think, there were question marks about him coming up at certain points in his career about dedication and things. And I think really at the top part of the game, I don't think he's the right guy, I think there are a lot of guys who wish they'd had the chance he had, who would have approached that second fight very differently. I don't think that, the way it went down, I don't think it served to answer a lot of questions that Joshua has around him. So we'll see how he ends it. But he's going to be kind of in the catbird seat until, when Fury and Wilder meet again, the winner of that fight is going to be pretty clearly the number 1 heavyweight in the world right now. Joshua's claim, he could say all he wants. He could have Hearn chirp all he wants. But, it's going to be the winner of Wilder and Fury. That fight, let's get it finalized and in the ring and done. And that should be one of the big things we see here early in 2020.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't think that you're going to see let's set people up for their expectations to be proper. What we'd all like to see is these 3 guys slug it out, 3 or 4 guys, but especially, AJ and Tyson Fury and Wilder, to really get in there and go at it and come out, last man standing type of thing, fighting each other in the rematches until it's all said and done and one guy has collected all the belts. However, I really don't think it's going to go like that. If you look at AJ, just won back the belts. I think he has the IBO, the IBF, the WBA, and the WBO. But the WBO and the IBF both have mandatory challengers for him. So the IBF mandatory, Kubert Pulev, and then Alexander Usyk, who we're going to get to these lists pretty shortly, is pretty solidly in the 4th to 6th place on the 5 top 10 lists that we have. And of note, above AJ, Fury, and Wilder, who between the 3 of them, Fury did not make any of the top 5 lists, the top 10 lists, that is, any of the 5 of them. And coming in at number 10 on one list was Wilder, and 10 on another list was AJ, and that's it. So we'll talk about that. It's a big year for heavyweights. I think WBO is going to go to Usyk. I think they're going to strip it from AJ. Usyk will probably win it in a fight where he's fighting somebody else. They both have a chance at the belt. And I think so at the end of next year, WBO, probably a champion will probably be Usyk. WBC champion, I'm going to say, is going to be Tyson Fury. I'm calling the upset over Wilder. And then that leaves the IBF and WBA probably for AJ, maybe Kubert Pulev. You and I both tend to agree that AJ's shown some chinks I think he dodged some people early with Eddie Hearn's help. I'm not sure that Pulev doesn't beat him. I would probably say AJ's the favorite there, but that's going to be fairly interesting. What do you think, both about Pulev, but I'm also curious what you think about how Usyk fits into all of this. There's this light heavyweight moving up, technically really great. Lomachenko, who leads most of the list, is kind of his style, his camp, training type of thing. Where do we go? What's this going to be, heavyweights, this next year? Is it just going to get more confusing? Are they going to unify anything? I don't think so. You break it down for us, brother.
Well, Usyk is an interesting guy there because I think, the fact that he's on pound for pound list and the other heavyweights are not gives you a little bit of an inkling. And to me, the pound for pound list is a completely different discussion, right? But, there is the rating of style and technique. If all weights were equal is the idea, right? So now if you take, AJ's style package and what he brings and compare it to Chocolate Latito's, who's more fun to watch? Who's, more technique, depth of technique, on display kind of thing. At the end of the day, the heavyweights are kind of a stock, for what to me, Fury's the one who maybe could crack the list because he adds a little bit of style and flair, of his own there. The other guys, Wilder's kind of looking for one big punch, I know he's better than that, but there are a lot of criticisms of him. And, to me, AJ has a lot, no heavyweight really belongs on the pound for pound list, but Usyk is, as you said, a guy moving up, a guy who's, avoided a lot of blemishes on his record all the way through, has that Lomachenko camp mystique to him, and has backed it up. He's really shown, that it holds up. He's got, heavyweight. There's going to be some new challenges there for him and stuff like that. But I think it's notable that if you're AJ, the WBO belt or the IBF belt, you could argue that the WBO has more pedigree, but they're offering Usyk.
Right. What's he have to do to keep that belt versus what he has to do to keep the other belt?
And that's the point. The IBF belt, Pulev's no pushover, as you hinted at.
No.
I think you'll get a motivated Pulev, and I think, in the world nowadays where you can actually do steroids and fight and then, create a legal process and stuff like that, who knows? He comes in sharp, and he's got an amateur background and stuff like that, and he's always been a fringe contender that sort of, fought Klitschko, and, Klitschko beat everybody to a certain point, right? So, he became like a Povetkin type where you're kind of waiting around for that post-Klitschko era, and now that we're there, he's jockeying for position. As you mentioned, for the WBO, I think, the WBO might wind up with Povetkin Usyk for that belt. And, Povetkin's, I believe, has a long history with the WBO. It almost should be like they should never do business with each other again. But I think they'll somehow overcome some of that. And they'll make a fight because I think Usyk is the guy that the top three are going to – it's more valuable for the top three to fight each other than to let Usyk into that top three.
Yeah, because if Usyk does crack his way in and is able to solve the riddle of fighting these bigger guys, and he can do that with technique and movement, and he doesn't really lack power, but he's going to be faster. He's going to have better footwork than these guys. Can Wilder knock him out? Absolutely. But if Usyk gets in and works his way into a seam, he can wedge his way in there and wreak havoc. In fact, he's already, as I say, ranking fifth on a lot of these lists.
Wilder is on record recently as saying, against me, you've got to fight 12 perfect rounds, and all I need is one, a perfect 2 seconds, right? Even analyzed that way, I think Usyk is the first guy who will sign up for that challenge and say, I'll take my chances with what I got.
Right, because he will beat him on points in a lot of those rounds. Wilder's been losing fights before when he's come back to win them, and probably this last fight. Hard, to,
Yeah,
you know.
and Usyk is the guy who can come closest to saying my technique's sound enough. 12 rounds,
Mhm.
I'm here for the 12 rounds. I'm not gonna go hard 6 and then survive 6. None of that is gonna come into play. He's a pretty complete fighter who can rely on his technique, and I think that's what makes him the most interesting challenge heading into next year in the heavyweight division. I think it plays
Absolutely.
out where Wilder, the winner of Wilder Fury 2, is probably going to fight Joshua, because I think at the beginning of next year you'll get a Joshua, milk fight, and they better be careful who they pick for it.
Mm-hmm.
But and that would leave, and if you're right, that sets up Fury Joshua in England, which I think becomes a Wembley Stadium level fight.
It does become really huge, and of course we can't go much deeper into this without saying what's been happening over the last week or so. Now, if you're watching this, December 2019, this is fresh. If you're watching it in 2020, as kind of a recap, it may have already happened. Let's see. AJ has offered to Fury to show up and spar with him to help him beat Wilder and bring the title back to, they're both Englishmen, so he wants to bring it back to the island, so to speak. And then, of course, he would get to fight for it. It's an interesting thing. Tyson Fury instantly accepted the offer, and then maybe AJ went back a little on it, and people called him on it. He said, no, I'm serious. Let me work it into my schedule. I don't know what's going to happen there. I think it probably would be good training, but at the same time, maybe each fighter learns something about each other. And does that make for a better fight when they actually step into the ring, or maybe a more dull fight because they've figured out how to counter some of the stuff and neutralize it without maybe, sometimes it just becomes they're just outsmarting each other and not really hitting each other a whole lot.
The bottom line is I think AJ better be careful what he asks for there. I don't think I think that what you're going into there is, however long the camp is going to be or however long your contract for sparring is going to be, you're going into a nonstop mind game. And that's a different type of pressure. I don't think you can learn anything about each other in the ring. I think, AJ will be forced to simulate style, do something else, and he won't want to give away, I find him a little bit vanilla, but, and Fury is certainly not going to give him the whole pack. He's going to be testing and working on some things. So I take this with a grain of salt. I don't think it'll happen. I'm in that camp.
Mm-hmm.
And, we'll see from there. I do think that the two are destined to meet. I think that's the biggest fight in boxing. As long as Joshua can not get beaten again, and he builds back up in some way, shape, or form. Then at the end of the next year, if Fury beats Wilder, then you've got that. And if Wilder beats Fury, then you've got Joshua versus Wilder, maybe in Vegas or something like that. You've got big fights there for Joshua right back in the driver's seat, which is where he wanted to be. I don't think he'll lose that by doing something stupid, so we'll see. Pulev could pull the upset, but Pulev is, at the end of the day, probably safer than Dillian White or some of those other types of people that are on the list. So that's why, I say you better be careful what you ask for, because, Dillian White, Dillian comes in motivated and Joshua still has questions to answer, and this, that, and the other thing, how many times do you want to really roll that dice?
Nope.
So yeah, I think Pulev is the safest option. I'm okay with that. I think, Pulev, he's had a PD, performance enhancements in his past, accusations and this, that, and the other stuff. But I trust that we'll get a pretty good version of him for this fight.
Looking forward to it, really. It should be a good year in heavyweight boxing, folks, really. However it goes down. We know there's some mandatory, so we kind of know what to expect, and we know February 22nd, I believe, we do get to see Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder step into the ring, and that'll chart the course for the rest of the year as to who fights who. We've got to get through the first couple that are already scheduled and see where we go. But man, I can't wait. It should be a fun year. And as I say, only two of the top 10 lists even put these heavyweights one ranking for each, a 10, with the exception of Usyk, who really that pound for pound rating for him is based off of his light heavyweight career, where he can move a little bit more. So interesting list there. Interesting heavyweight stuff next year, Miguel, for sure.
And heading into the pound for pound list, I mean, what do you want to know with that? To me, it is a little man's list. The way I approach them, I prefer to go with guys that I think are exponents of technique. So you'll see some things that many people disagree with on some of the lists. Some of the lists still have Pacquiao on there. But
they do, in fact, and I've got.
If you were once the number one guy, how much do you have to really slip, to fall off completely off the list, right? So a lot, and then he's fallen off and maybe bounced back onto the list. Maybe after the tournament. So to me, I don't drop people from the list that fast because of a loss. Because
the ring has them at number 10
of a technique-driven list, but some people making the list manage that aspect different. You know what I mean?
Right, so, and I want to get into that a little bit, Miguel. Off air, we were talking. Manny's number 10 with BoxRec, and he's as high as number 8 with the transnational, and he's number 10 with the ring. So he makes an appearance 3 times. But you had mentioned that the transnational boxing ranking board, you got an invitation to do that. You passed it on to someone else on the island. You're in Costa Rica, for those of you that don't know that. And you've got a long judging background with MMA and boxing as well. But you passed on it. But you mentioned some regionality plays into that list a little bit, so they try and spread.
I like what they do, and the only reason I passed on it is because I gave it to a guy who also lives here in Costa Rica that also has an expertise in like Cubans and Cuban boxing and stuff like that. And I felt it was a good position for him with, having, close to 40 years background. He also speaks Russian. So in certain things in terms of like knowing the Russian fighters and knowing Cuban fighters and things, I felt he was the right person, because what the Transnational Boxing Group does is they just tally votes. If you're a qualified person from a country and they extend you a vote and you take it, you'll be asked to vote, on a weekly basis, I believe, based on changes and things, who fought and things. And, you put in your top 10. And, there is going to be a regional aspect, Pacquiao is still on the list. I'm not surprised. In Asia, he's going to get voted very high. I could see people voting for him, top 3, the Filipino voters, which may be a couple of people, will still probably put Pacquiao in the top 3. Right. That will raise his stock in certain ways. You see Inoue very high. He's a high, name out there, and he's winning over a lot of people. But again, there's no one in Japan who's not going to put him number 1. That's a little bit of an anomaly with that style. But you take it all with a grain of salt. Overall, you get a very balanced list, and you get some things. I think the Canelo question is really one of those questions. You try for a list of purists and boxing people that are like-minded across the world, but at the end of the day, Mexico is a hotbed for boxing. If they have 8 voters from Mexico, how is Canelo not going to be the number 1 person?
You're right, and that's probably a good segue to tell the folks sort of the top 3. We have 5 different lists, and let me just tell the top 3 on that. And 3 of them are led by Lomachenko, my pick. 2 of them are led by Canelo. And then there's some real anomalies on some of these lists that we'll go through. But the top 3, for ring, you have Canelo, Lomachenko, and Inoue, which you just mentioned. Boxing Writers of America, Lomachenko, Crawford, Canelo. Transnational Boxing Ranking Board, Lomachenko, Crawford, Inoue. ESPN has Lomachenko, Crawford, and Canelo. And Boxing Rec, Box Records, BoxRec.com has Canelo, Crawford, then Triple G 3rd with Lomachenko 4th. They also have, I think 3 people on their list that nobody else has on their list. It's the most influx list that I've seen. It's all over the place. So I'm not sure if they just have a smaller pool that they're going from. I don't know if you know anything about boxing, box rec, but they do have USIC 6, and as you go up, USIC 6 at ESPN, 4th at Transnational, 5th at Boxing Writers, and 5th at Ring. So between him and Errol Spence, who averages right around where USIC is, maybe 6th or 5th, when USIC is 6th, it's because Errol Spence was 5th, for example. So those 2 guys are very solidly on everybody's list, although not in the top 3. So there's sort of honorable mentions I wanted to throw out there. Errol Spence and Usyk both averaging about a 5, a culmination of all the 5 top 10 lists that we have. Those were the notable things that I see on these lists. Do you know anything about how BoxRec may do it compared to some of these others, and also Lomachenko being a little lighter and have more tools in his box? Is that why he impresses me over a Canelo who's fighting at light heavyweight now? I mean, can you make any sense out of my crazy mind why I just absolutely love Vasily Lomachenko and think he should be number 1 on everybody's list? You know what I'm saying? But BoxRec and Lomachenko, talk to me about those 2 things, if you would, please.
Well, for my part, I had Crawford in 1.
Fair enough.
Lomachenko, and Crawford really hasn't done anything to lose that spot, so I've got them 1 too.
I can see that.
I don't know about BoxRec, but I can surmise a few things. And if you look at the history of, them, at first, they claim to have some type of algorithm or math-driven formula that rates people. Okay? And now, so whatever that is, it seems to me to be a little bit unclear because, some things don't add up. One of the things I don't like, about it is, I don't know, you probably got to go back about 2 years now. And BoxRec's the standard. That's why, you have their list and stuff. They're out there with the database and stuff, and everybody looks at them. I mean, the database.
And they're very helpful. Let's not make it just to slam them.
No,
I like what they do.
I
just question this ranking bit.
I can tell you, though, that, there are countries in Latin America that there's fraud going on in order to get records altered on BoxRec. And I can show you events on BoxRec that have fights of major boxers that, for example, in Colombia, major boxers from Colombia that have fights on their record where the local newspaper reports on the show up until the last 3 fights of the 3 major guys. It's like they were added to that list because after the report, now that we can document it through newspapers. So BoxRec is an imperfect system because they have to count on people in Colombia and the integrity of people in Colombia, or wherever other these anomalies. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, I believe those types of countries also had some falsification of records in BoxRec and things like that. So it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But that's okay, if you mean well. But what I don't understand is how you can have a formula for pound, and I believe this is their all-time pound-for-pound list formula, where, they, in their conclusion, put Archie Moore there. And Archie Moore is a guy who had, 250 fights, was a world champion probably in his mid-40s, lied about his age. No one knew his real age. His mother gave a different age than him and stuff like that. And this guy was like boxing royalty. And he fought Ali and things like that towards the end of his career and things. So he was an old school guy. They called him the old mongoose. So he was number 1 on their list. All of a sudden we wake up one day and it's Floyd Mayweather. What changed? Somebody had to go in and mathematically and change a formula. And what caused that change? To all of a sudden, it's not like, against some of the guys in that list, now the new list has a smattering of new guys that are very suspect, And I think it has to do with, the fact is Floyd, can claim world championships in multiple weight classes, but some were like a cup of coffee and move on, and this, that, the other stuff. But if you have 5 weight classes, are you a better champion than a guy like Marvin Hagler who dominated at 1 weight class? It's also an argument for these types of things, right? So, but to justify to anybody that Floyd Mayweather is the number 1 boxer of all time in a math formula that had Archie Moore there means that somebody had to change something. That's what that just doesn't sit well with me. You have the formula, it sticks. If there's a mistake or there's something that has to be fixed because it doesn't make sense, what is it? But if it's Jimmy to put Floyd first, was there even a check with that? Did Floyd write you guys, hey, Keith, I like what you guys are doing, but hey, did it even have to be mentioned after you get it back? I'm not even saying I know anything. I don't know anything. I do know I woke up and Floyd Mayweather was better than Archie Moore, and that put
just like that.
Yeah, and that put me, much more attentive to the types of things that BoxRec is doing. They're the person changing that formula. I don't know if it was done with complete boxing, with the ethics in mind. I think there may have been, some type of ulterior motive. Maybe it was to get the list to have more modern names in it because, who the hell knows who Archie Moore is. But, I don't know what the motivation was, but I tend to steer towards the conspiracy theory, right?
Yeah, they may have seen the metrics and wrote favoring, as you say, just as simple as the more weight classes. Give a higher value to each weight class as far as your how it raises, the person's score. Yeah. And it's a foregone conclusion at that point.
What if, like in the case of Floyd, he beat like a guy like De La Hoya, who also was a multiple weight class champion.
Mm-hmm.
So now all of a sudden, now you're in a position, and then even De La Hoya, if De La Hoya won a championship at a heavier weight, I'd have to look. But the point is, how do you rate that? Because now you're talking about a guy that went to 4 or 5 rounds. How do you rate that against like a guy like a Benny Leonard? Who was like a lightweight wizard and never fought, beyond lightweight. When he tried to after a 6-year retirement and come back, it didn't go good when he fought the top guys. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So he was just a lightweight champion, but Benny Leonard is on many all-time. He should have been on the BoxRec list. I think he was, and maybe he dropped down immeasurably, so that they could put, I don't know, suspect guys on there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And so in a broader sense, too, what we're getting at is I would look at all these lists, just for fun and for your basic understanding. We're talking about all-time lists and we're talking about yearly lists. But when you look at the list, don't just look at the Ring or Boxing Writers of America or Transnational. I would say look at all the lists. All 5 are compiled on Wikipedia. Not always brand new, up to date. You can get deeper into it. But if you're just looking at an overview, folks, for what the next year holds and what some of these people that are considered top 10 type fighters, then this is a nice place to go. And then when you see these names on a card, you might be in for a treat, hopefully. And so, hey, we kind of touched on this already a little bit, but I think if Usyk can win the WBO title, he moves up on a lot of these lists. I think he moves into a solid 4th place on a lot of the lists. I think it's one of those things that you said heavyweights are hard to get on a pound-for-pound list without the range of skills. But I think Usyk can move up to number 4. I think that could be a surprise for this time next year, kind of predicting and looking back. I think Errol Spence is someone that you mentioned, and I said he's kind of average and right there with Usyk, 5th place. I think Errol has a chance to move up even more if this car wreck really didn't hurt him. We may find him in the top 3 of 2 or 3 of these lists fairly easily.
I'm completely with you. You should look at every list possible, as long as they have some legitimacy. I mean, you don't want to, just look at Joe Blow's list on the internet and stuff like that. But you want, the 4 or 5 lists that we're going over here, they make a lot of sense. I mean, but let's break it down further and we'll talk about a name we haven't mentioned yet. And so who's number 1 on the Ring?
Number 1 on the Ring, Canelo Alvarez. Yeah.
Does it seems strange to you that the owner of the ring is Oscar De La Hoya?
Oh, you went there. You went there. Of course, folks.
Not that there are. See, here's the thing: is Canelo's a
promoter. If you didn't know, he's a promoter.
You know, in their defense, Canelo's a guy that you could probably justify at number one. You know, and he's probably number one on other lists as well, including the latest transnational list, which is the vote-driven list that we were talking about.
That's right.
That's coming after his Kovalev win, which, at the end of the day, just breaking down the science of it, he won by knockout, moving up 2 weight classes and 16 pounds against the world champion.
Yep.
You know, so it's hard not to say that that's not an uplifting and that he's not justifiable, but you do have to take that with a grain of salt, because if you look back a year, Canelo's star was a little bit down, and, you know, maybe less pound for pound, but he's always been solid number one on the ring. You know what I mean? So it's like you got to know, you got to look and stuff like that. And Canelo's one of those guys that, you know, to me, you know, I've heard real good boxing people go both ways on Canelo. You know, I've heard a lot of people, you know, Canelo's handpicked opponents, and, you know, he fights people when it's right, and then, you know, he's very strong. You could probably pull an airplane. But like a super technical fighter, you know, I've seen people not describe him that way. And then I've seen other people, you know, including Montel Griffin, who's, you know, a former world champion at light heavyweight, you know, where he just won one, who loves Canelo, who thinks, you know, Canelo does things, you know, especially on defense and stuff after the Floyd fight, where you can see that he's come along and things. So, but, you know, Canelo's a guy that I can see people leaving on, like, you know, in a vote-driven system. If you're not in Mexico, there are some people that have left Canelo off their top 10 list. You know, at this point, it's hard to argue with him because he's beyond that. But I think that's one of those things where, you know, to me, Canelo, the top 3 do not include Canelo in no way, shape, or form. So, you know, you can leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that. There are just a few. We usually tend to agree on the overall basics. We've known for a long time. I like Loma a little more than Crawford, and vice versa for you. But when it comes to, you know, does AJ have some chinks in the armor that can be exploited by the right guy? Yeah, we know it. For those of you that follow our wage rages, Miguel and I talked about AJ needing to have a boring fight in Ruiz too, and how we encourage you guys to vote to bet, that is, on the fight going the distance, because that's where the real money was. Nobody thought it would go the distance, but I thought if it didn't go the distance, then Ruiz is champion again, basically, and it's probably going the distance. So, in AJ's credit, he did what he had to do to win that fight. I've had fighters that I have liked better than AJ, that have Lennox Lewis would often fight certain fighters in a slow style or whatnot. But he was smart enough to understand when he had to fight those fights, and they were kind of boring sometimes, but he got the job done. But at any rate, I'm the same way with you on those guys, and on Canelo. I'm not as big in Canelo. I think Triple G beat him at least once. And even though it wasn't called that way, I think that's pretty well in agreement across the board to people that watch that fight. But yeah, I don't put him. I think Crawford or Loma. I think either you or me one is right. And Canelo, despite the Ring magazine and De La Hoya and those issues, I'm going to let Dana White tell you what I think about let his opinion about De La Hoya speak in part for me. I think both those guys are a little over the top the way they go at each other, but I think they blast some truth out when they're angry at each other too. And
you talk about
in the middle of that,
you know, peers in the bank account neighborhood, right? So who knows how much of that is for show and stuff like that, you know?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you mentioned Golovkin, so he's a guy that popped up on one of the pound for pound lists. That's where I told you again, depending on who is on the list. Yeah, they probably were, you know, back in the day before the first Canelo fight, you might have found Golovkin number 1 on that list.
I think he was for a while, as a matter of fact, on a couple of these lists. I think you're right.
Like I said, the thing is because if they look at it pound for pound as just a talent-driven list, one loss, it doesn't mean all your talent goes away. And that's why you still see Pacquiao. I'm going to ask you a question. You might not have the answer at the top of your head, but is Chocolatito still on any of these lists?
He's not, actually. I've kind of been burning these lists in my brain. He's not on them.
He fell from grace pretty hard, but he was a guy that, was on top for a little while. And after the first Saur Ruvusai loss, I could see that he hung on to, a position on these lists and stuff. So Golovkin, there you got guys who, maybe rate Golovkin a little higher than most. They had him number 1 where, probably people had him in the top 5, 8, and, so it's hard for them to pull him off all the list completely, but I think that's a little bit more of the, at the end of the day, too, that's another thing I think as a user of the lists that you want to, be on top of is, some guys will pop up on a list like that. Like Golovkin really doesn't belong on a top 10 list right now, probably. But there might be an anomaly, right? And then there may be, some secret guys on there, but you're still going to be talking about a list of 18 to 20 guys across the board.
You're right. You're right about that. Most all of them have the top 4 or 5 guys. I mean, you get some outliers. Juan Francisco Estrada makes an appearance on one list only. On 2 lists, I'm sorry. Micah Garcia is actually 8th or 9th on a lot of these lists, even after his recent loss. So that goes to what you said about, talent versus, undefeated or whatnot, not needing to be there. Saur Rungvisai is 10th on one of the lists, the transnational boxing. And again, folks, that goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Miguel, the transnational having that regional effect. Maybe that's how Saur is on this list. Manny is 8th.
You get a lot of Latin people that are going to vote for him. I mean, he didn't slay the dragon. He slayed the dragon twice.
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah, but for the most part, you're seeing repeats. That's why we suggest you take a look at all these. Miguel Burchelt makes 1 or 2 lists. Callum Smith is 8th on BoxRec. Leo Santa Cruz is 9th. So, and those 2 guys.
Josh Taylor popping up. I mean, after the pro grade win.
You would think so, but he's not. I don't see Josh Taylor on any of these. Again, these may be slightly out of date, but I've got Callum Smith at 26 on the BoxRec list.
Transnational's latest, Taylor comes in at 10th.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Hell of a fighter. I really like what he's been doing too. So I don't begrudge that necessarily. And these things are always in flux. Look, we've got fights, every month, every weekend, a lot of times, and things do change. But you do see some consistency, and I think that's where you can start to see sort of your up and comers. Your Alexander Usyk, your Errol Spence Jr. They're moving up. They're in that mid range, and they're not coming from the top 3 and headed down. They're headed up. So this will be a year that you're going to want to watch Errol Spence Jr. and Alexander Usyk and some of those guys. Gennady Golovkin is 7th or 8th or 10th, as high as 3 on one list. But again, he's going down. He was ranked first. So how much does he go down? These are some of the things we can look at. But if you're really looking at 2020, you're going to want to look at these guys that are hot, that are making their careers, that aren't, Triple G needs to make that fight with Canelo again, and that's not Canelo's priority. So he's not going to be as hot this year. Still fun to watch, but you've got some young blood coming up, and you've got the heavyweights that have been boiling for a while. So that's a pretty good overview there.
Yeah, with Spence Jr., the big fight for him is Crawford, obviously, and I think with the car accident and him recovering and stuff, I don't think we'll get that right away. Bob Arum has said he's ready to make the fight and he can make it happen fast. But I don't think it's in Spence's favor right now to go into that fight. So I think that'll get postponed maybe for the later half of next year, but I don't think we'll get that one right away. Usyk, I think we'll wait and see before moving him up too high who his next opponent is going to be. If it's for the WBO belt that's been stripped and he gets a Povetkin type under his record, then he's going to be a player that'll stay on these lists. Josh Taylor is an interesting name. I think the guy to watch, because he really doesn't have a foil that jumps out at you, is Inoue. The
Yeah.
Japanese guy is, he's got that star power. They've been letting him, off the leash a little bit in what's a very, closed world in Japan with boxing and things. And, he's, he checks off all the boxes and stuff like that. And without, Chocolatito at one point, was the number one guy. And the thought was, Inoue is much bigger. He's moved on to bantamweight. Catching Chocolatito on the way down, Inoue probably would have destroyed him anyway. It's hard for me you can't really assume that, but let's assume it for this conversation. Inoue doesn't have a guy like that. Estrada, who's a very sharp little boxer, is just that. He's a flyweight coming up like Chocolatito was. Inoue has belts at flyweight, but Inoue is huge. And I see Inoue, possibly moving up one more weight class from where he is now at bantamweight. So you could see him operating in junior feather at 126. And all that's very interesting for Lomachenko. Inoue is the guy who doesn't really have an opponent that everybody goes, I want to see that guy. With Lomachenko, you've got, Gervonta Davis developing, and, Usyk, you want him in the mix with the heavyweights. And, all on down the line, everybody, Manny Pacquiao may fight Mikey Garcia. You're talking about old school guys that pop up on the list, Interesting fights all the way around. Inoue is the guy without, who can maybe operate with no fear right now.
And he's number 3, folks, on my version of the transnational boxing ranking. I know you have a different one, a more updated one, but he's number 3 on that and on the ring.
Yeah, the transnational has Alvarez 1, Inoue 2, and Lomachenko 3, Crawford 4.
So he moved up to number 2. So that's where we're at the end of 2019. Inoue has cracked the top 3 on 2 of the 5 lists. I don't see him. I don't see him high up on ESPN's list. I think he's 4th or 5th. But yeah, he's definitely somebody that has the career trajectory and also the weight classes that lend itself to getting himself in the top 3 on maybe as many as 4 or 5 of these lists this time next year at the rate he's going. So I think he'll move up. I think Spence will move up. I think Usyk could move up, but as you suggest, it's kind of harder for him to move up. He may be at his high water mark. He may move up a ranking or 2, but it's hard to see a heavyweight, even one moving up from light heavyweight, maintaining that speed to move up into that 1 and 2 slot with the competition that's out there, in my opinion. But nonetheless, I think it's a great victory for him to be averaging around 5th place, Usyk, and I'd be happy with that. And build your career for what it's worth and not for what talking heads like us placement on a list that we give you. Go do your thing, brother.
Usyk seems to have his head, that camp of Russian fighters seems to define themselves obviously with the technique, but I think with mental focus too. You don't get to be a ballerina without hours in the ring, and I know Lomachenko did ballet and stuff like that, but I'm talking about that's the elite level that these guys have reached too,
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think Usyk, and there's a camp of people that think Usyk's better, but that Lomachenko is just smaller and flashier. But the other guy is the one that makes less mistakes, and Loma's athletic enough that he can maybe, you can't teach Lomachenko's style and have anyone do it because you're not Lomachenko, right?
Well, and that's part of it too.
That basic soundness.
There's so much that Loma has going for him.
Basic soundness, an equal level of intelligence and stuff like that. And yeah, he's slower of foot because he's 70 pounds bigger. So you're not going to be able to throw 84 punches in 3 seconds,
Right.
So, okay, but how do you rate that? How do you rate a guy who's that precise? That, he's a guy who really has the mental game too.
And that's why we don't make too much argument or fuss about where these lists fall. They're just kind of fun and a bit of a guide, bit of a yardstick to kind of put you in the right direction. But that's why they step into the ring. Let's face it. We're never going to settle who's a better fighter between, Deontay Wilder and Inoue. because they're never going to fight. It never makes sense. But we can think about what they're doing in their careers at this time and whatnot with what they have to work with. And yeah, I'm in agreement with you. I mean, and Loma has a couple of things. You briefly alluded to the dance. He was put in the Ukrainian national dance troupe for 3 years. And then I've seen him recently training underwater, where he holds his breath for 3 minutes, 2.5, 3.5 minutes. Basically, he walks into the middle of the ring and takes a gut punch in the first 10 seconds of a round. He's already used to not breathing for 3 minutes. Who cares? I mean, you can't will yourself into that. You have to build that lung capacity, and and the footwork, and the brain, and the adjustments, and the speed, and the power. There's a lot of things going on in that package, and you can tell folks how he does it or what he does, but you can't just automatically. Some guys just can't hold their breath 3 minutes. I'm not going to find out if I can anytime soon.
He reminds me most of Roy Jones, really.
Yeah.
When you saw Roy Jones, you were just like, oh my God, and but you can't teach people to fight with their arms like this, It's like, fight like this with your head out.
Right.
You can't do that. So, yeah, he's an anomaly, but 2020 is really looking to be a solid year here. I think there's a nice roundup of the top names. Keep your eye out on the top 10 lists. That's a fun way to follow the sport. At the top level and stuff right now with the Zone and, ESPN Plus and a lot of the apps and stuff. It's really become a small world, and you get to see almost all the boxing. Inoue could be a household name by the end of 2020. One last shout out would be a guy like a Teofimo Lopez, who may be on the verge of getting on these lists at some point here with the wins at the end of the year. He just didn't appear yet, and it's going to be a good year.
I completely agree with you. Going to be a great year. Teofimo Lopez, great prospect to watch. Thankful to you for pointing him out to me. Well over a year ago at this point, and he's been a pleasure to watch. So yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to doing more wage rages with you and more of these. We'll come back and do some of these. Where are we at now, so to speak, on the top 10? Definitely in a year, but probably as we go. Miguel and I try and hop on here and do this quite a bit. Miguel, I always appreciate it, man. These are fun. I have a blast doing them, and looking forward to a brand new year of it.
Absolutely. It's our CRP boxing roundup for 2019, looking at 2020. That's Anthony Scott Piatt, ASP. He's the boxing guru. You want to check out his picks and the wage rages throughout the year. And we may do a wrap-up of his top 3 big wins with the wage rage and what he does there throughout 2019. We got a couple of, he's won a lot more than 3. But 3, notable ones that are going to be fun to go over. It's always fun to look at.
We'll go back through the notes. I've got my top 2 picked out, and we'll definitely pull something together for the folks on that and get that recorded here soon. It's been a fun year, and we'll talk about that on the other show for Wage Rage. But Wage Rage recap coming soon, folks.
All right, bro. Take it easy and have a great 2020, guys.
Everybody, you take care.